I hadn't planned to stop, but exhaustion doesn't care about plans. After driving through miles of rain-slicked highway, the Pinewood Inn was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in hours. Its flickering neon sign cut through the mist like a warning, but I was too tired to heed it. I pulled into the gravel lot, my tires crunching to a stop. There were only 3 cars parked there, their windows fogged with condensation. The building itself looked weathered by decades of neglect, its once bright paint faded to a sickly gray. I hesitated for a moment, the low hum of dread settling in my stomach. Then the rain picked up, heavier now, drumming against the roof of my car. I grabbed my bag and made my way inside. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew, with water stains creeping across the ceiling. A small desk sat against the far wall, and behind it was a man who looked as though he hadn't slept in weeks. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, and he greeted me with a kind of smile that wasn't meant to be reassuring. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes," I said. "Just for the night." He slid a guest book toward me, its pages curling with age. I signed my name, the pen scratching faintly against the paper. "Room 7, he said, handing me a brass key. "Thanks," I said, turning toward the hallway. "Wait," he said abruptly. I paused, looking back at him. His expression was unreadable. "Don't turn on the TV," he said. "What?" He didn't elaborate, just stared at me with those sunken eyes. "Okay," I said, my voice uncertain. "Thanks for the warning, I guess." Room 7 was exactly what you'd expect from a place like this. The bedspread was a floral pattern straight out of the 1970s, the wallpaper yellowed and peeling at the edges. A single chair sat near the window, and in the corner of the room was an old CRT television, its screen blank and reflective. I tossed my bag onto the chair and sank onto the bed, the springs groaning beneath me. The receptionist's warning replayed in my mind. "Don't turn on the TV." I glanced at it. The black screen seemed to absorb the dim light, casting an unnatural darkness over the corner of the room. "It's just a TV," I told myself. But the longer I stared at it, the heavier the air in the room seemed to become. I shook off the feeling and turned away, climbing under the scratchy covers. The rain outside continued to fall, its rhythmic tapping against the window lulling me into an uneasy sleep. I woke to the sound of static. It was faint at first, barely audible beneath the drumming of rain. But as I sat up, the noise grew louder, filling the room with its crackling presence. The TV was on. I froze, staring at the screen. Gray and white snow filled the display, the static hissing like whispers in the dark. I turned it off, I muttered, my voice trembling. As I reached for the remote, the static shifted. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something. A figure, faint and indistinct, standing in the center of the screen. The image flickered, then disappeared. I turned the TV off and climbed back into bed, pulling the covers over my head. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, the static was gone, but unease lingered like a bad dream. I packed my things quickly, eager to leave, but when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. The hallway wasn't the same. The carpet was gone, replaced by wooden floorboards that creaked beneath my weight. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air smelled damp and sour. "What the hell?" I whispered. I turned back toward my room, but the door had disappeared. In its place was a blank wall. Panic set in. I stumbled down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The further I went, the more the hallway twisted and turned, becoming a labyrinth of identical corridors. Doors lined the walls, each one marked with a brass number. I tried several, but they were all locked. The static returned, faint at first, then louder. Ahead of me, at the end of the hallway, the door creaked open. Room 7. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The room was identical to the one I'd left. Same bedspread, same wallpaper, same ominous television. But something was different. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the room itself was alive. The TV clicked on. This time, the screen didn't show static. It showed the hallway outside the room. A figure stood at the far end, its blurred face turned toward the camera. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure began to walk, its movement slow and deliberate. The screen flickered, and suddenly, the figure was in the room with me. I stumbled back, my legs trembling beneath me. The figure stood motionless in the corner, its face an unrecognizable blur. It wore a dark suit, its fabric hanging loosely on its thin frame. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head, as if studying me. Then it spoke, its voice a distorted crackle. You shouldn't have turned it on. Before I could respond, the lights flickered and the room went dark. When the lights returned, the figure was gone, but the static remained. The TV now showed images, faint, flickering scenes of people. I saw a man sitting in a dark room, staring blankly at a television. A woman crying, her face buried in her hands. A child, standing motionless, their eyes wide with fear. The scenes shifted, blending into one another like a broken reel of film. What is this? I asked aloud, though I wasn't expecting an answer. The signal, a voice replied. I turned to see the figure standing by the door, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking. It's everywhere, the figure said, but only some can see it. Over the next few days, or what felt like days, I learned the truth about the Pinewood Inn. The figure, who called itself the Signal, explained that the inn wasn't bound by the normal rules of time and space. It was a node, a point of connection for those who had stumbled too close to the frequency. What happens to them? I asked. They become part of the broadcast, the Signal replied. I thought about the people I'd seen on the TV, the man, the woman, the child. Were they trapped here too? Can I leave? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Signal didn't reply. Desperation drove me to try. I ran through the hallways, throwing open doors, searching for an exit. But every path led back to room 7. The TV was always on, its screen showing my every move in real time. At one point, I saw something else, a car pulling into the parking lot. A man stepped out, looking tired and disheveled. It was me. I don't know how long I've been here. The Signal doesn't speak to me anymore. The hallways are silent, the room's empty. But the TV is never off. It shows people sometimes, new arrivals, wandering the halls, their faces filled with the same fear I felt. I try to warn them to scream through the static, but they can't hear me. All I can do is watch and wait. The first sign of trouble was the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, like a whisper you couldn't quite hear. On Friday evening, as I sat on a couch eating reheated spaghetti, I caught a whiff of something sour. My first thought was that the milk in the fridge had gone bad, but when I checked, it was fine. I dismissed it as my imagination, resolved to take out the garbage later and return to the mindless glow of the TV. By Saturday morning, the smell had grown worse. It followed me into the kitchen, then the bathroom, and lingered in the air as I brushed my teeth. It wasn't overpowering yet, but it was enough to gnaw at the edges of my attention. Sour, sweet, cloying, like rotting fruit left out too long in the sun. I opened every window, scrubbed the counters, took out the trash, and even sprayed an entire can of air freshener throughout the house. But by Saturday night, the smell had become impossible to ignore. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, as the stink filled my lungs with every breath. It was inescapable now, seeping into my clothes and sheets. It wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It seemed to rise from beneath the floorboards, faint at first but growing stronger the closer I got to the hallway. My heart raced as a strange, inexplicable dread settled over me. Something wasn't right. The house had seemed so perfect when I first bought it 6 months ago. It wasn't much to look at, a 2-bedroom bungalow on the outskirts of town with peeling paint, sagging shutters, and a yard overrun with weeds, but it was mine. After years of renting cramped apartments, I was finally a homeowner. Mrs. Gordon, the elderly woman who sold it to me, had lived there for decades. She was kind, if a little peculiar, and spoke about the house with a mixture of fondness and sorrow. This house is full of memories, she told me during the walkthrough. Some of them are harder to leave behind than others. At the time, I thought she was talking about her late husband, whose faded portrait still hung in the living room. Now, I wasn't so sure. The crawl space wasn't something I'd given much thought to when I moved in. It was tucked away beneath a wooden panel in the hallway, concealed by an old throw rug. The realtor had mentioned it in passing, calling it a convenient storage option. I never even opened it. The idea of crawling around in the dark beneath the house had always made my skin crawl. Now, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Sunday evening, I decided to investigate. I armed myself with a flashlight, a dust mask, and a pair of heavy-duty gloves. My heart raced as I peeled back the throw rug, revealing the wooden panel beneath. It looked old, worn, and slightly warped from years of moisture. I pried it open with a screwdriver, releasing a rush of cold, damp air that made me gag. The smell hit me full force, sharp and sour and suffocating. Even through the mask, it was unbearable, like something wet and rotten, long past the point of decay. I pointed my flashlight into the opening, but the beam barely penetrated the darkness below. Just find the source, I muttered to myself. It's probably a dead animal. Nothing to freak out about. Taking a deep breath, I lowered myself into the crawl space. The crawl space was worse than I'd imagined. The air was heavy and damp, thick with the stench of decay. The ceiling was so low I had to hunch over, and the dirt floor squelched beneath my gloves as I crawled forward. The flashlight beam jittered as my hands trembled, casting long, shifting shadows across the narrow walls. At first, all I saw were the remnants of forgotten junk, old cans, crumpled newspapers, and a rusted lawn chair tipped on its side. The space seemed to stretch endlessly, fading into darkness. Roots dangled from the beams above like skeletal fingers, swaying slightly in the cold, still air. That's when I noticed the writing. It was carved into the wooden beams, etched deep into the grain with something sharp. The letters were uneven and jagged, as though they'd been scratched out in a frenzy. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat. Not alone. The words were repeated over and over, carved into every surface I could see. Some were small, barely legible, while others stretched across entire beams, gouged so deeply that splinters jutted out around them. The shavings were fresh. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced with questions. Who had done this? When? And why? The answers didn't come. Instead, my flashlight beam caught something else, a set of footprints in the dirt. They weren't mine. The prints were small, bare, and human, pressed deep into the soil. They led deeper into the crawl space, disappearing into the shadows. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. Something compelled me forward, a mix of morbid curiosity and irrational determination. I followed the footprints, crawling slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The smell grew stronger with every inch I moved, wrapping around me like an invisible shroud. My hands sank deeper into the damp soil, and I had to bite back the urge to gag as I crawled over something soft and unidentifiable. I told myself it was just trash, debris from decades of neglect. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bundle of rags, crumpled in the corner like discarded trash. But as I moved closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't rags. It was a body. The figure was twisted and broken, its limbs contorted in unnatural angles. The skin was pale and waxy, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its mouth hung open, frozen in a silent scream, and its hollow eyes seemed to stare straight through me. I scrambled back, my flashlight shaking violently in my hand. That's when I noticed its fingers, raw and bloody, with splintered nails worn down to the bone. They were clawed into the wood, scraping at the carvings. Not alone. The words weren't a warning. They were a message, a plea. A sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves. Then it grew louder, scraping, skittering, dragging. It echoed through the crawl space, coming from somewhere behind me. Slowly, I turned, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Something moved. It was too fast to see clearly, a flash of pale skin and elongated limbs. It disappeared into the shadows before I could register what I was looking at. My chest tightened as the sound came again, this time closer. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I turned and crawled as fast as I could, my knees scraping against the uneven ground. The flashlight bounced wildly, the beam catching glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision. I could feel it behind me, closing the distance with every passing second. Somehow, I reached the opening and pulled myself out, slamming the wooden panel shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely push the throw rug back into place. I spent the rest of the night in the living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife in one hand and my phone in the other. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? That I'd found a body. That there was something down there with it. By morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't stay another night in the house. I called a contractor to seal off the crawl space and spent the day packing what little I could fit in my car. That night, as I sat in the living room one last time, the house was eerily quiet. The smell was gone, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over. Then, just as I was about to leave, I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from beneath the floor, and then the voice. Not alone. It began on a cool autumn evening when the first threads of mist slithered into our small town. Fog wasn't uncommon here, but this was different, denser, darker, and carrying with it a strange silence that muffled the world. By morning, the fog lingered like a shroud, so thick that even the sun seemed unable to pierce through it. At first, people treated it like any other weather anomaly, something to complain about on the way to work or while sipping coffee at the diner. But then the whispers started. It was subtle at first, barely audible over the hum of life. A strange murmur that seemed to rise and fall with the breeze, but there was no wind to carry it. Old Mrs. Carlson, who lived at the edge of town, swore she heard her late husband calling her name in the fog. Others claimed to hear children laughing, though no one could find any kids playing outside. By the third day, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. People began locking their doors and shutting their windows tight, but it didn't help. The fog crept through every crack and crevice, curling around door frames and seeping under windowsills. It wasn't long before the whispers found their way inside. The town grew quieter, as if everyone were holding their breath. The streets were deserted, the schools closed, and the church bells rang hollow in the emptiness. The whispers were inescapable now, constant hum just below the threshold of understanding. Some claimed they could make out words, pleas, warnings, even threats, but no two accounts ever matched. On the fourth night, the fog thickened to the point where visibility was nearly zero. That was when the disappearances began. It started with Joe Harper, the gas station attendant. He was last seen standing outside his station, staring into the fog as if entranced. When his wife went looking for him, she found only his shoes, neatly placed in the center of the parking lot. The next day, 3 more people vanished, then 7, then 12. Each time, their belongings were left behind, as if they'd simply stepped out of their lives and into the mist. Panic set in. The mayor called in state authorities, but the roads leading into town were swallowed by the fog, cutting us off from the outside world. Radios and cell phones stopped working, replaced by static and faint whispers. We were alone. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They spoke in voices we recognized, loved ones, friends, even our own. Come outside, they coaxed. It's safe. We promise. Some people couldn't resist. They opened their doors and vanished into the mist, their cries fading into silence. By the 7th day, only a handful of us remained, barricaded in the old library at the center of town. We huddled together, surrounded by books and candles, as the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. That night, we made a pact. No one would leave, no matter what we heard. But the fog had other plans. Around midnight, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. We held hands and prayed, but it wasn't enough. One by one, the whispers called us by name. Sarah, they said, in the voice of her little brother who drowned last summer. Come to me. Henry, they whispered, sounding just like his late wife. I've missed you. I don't know how long I held out. Hours, minutes. Time seemed meaningless in the endless fog. But eventually, I heard it, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Claire. It whispered soft and sweet, like a lullaby. It's me. It's Mom. I wanted to resist. I truly did. But the fog knows your deepest desires, your most painful regrets. It knows how to pull you in. And as I write this, my candle sputtering in the damp air, I can feel the fog pressing closer. The whispers are calling my name again. Louder this time, more urgent. I don't remember stepping outside, but the cold bite of the mist on my skin told me I had. The whispers surrounded me, wrapping around me like a cocoon, lulling me into a dreamlike state. I walked aimlessly, the world around me reduced to shifting shadows and faint echoes. The fog played tricks on my eyes. Shapes moved just beyond my vision, flickers of figures that dissolved the moment I turned my head. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet, as though the very earth had changed beneath the shroud. And the voices, they were everywhere, weaving a tapestry of sound that tugged at the edges of my sanity. "Claire," the voice of my mother beckoned. "You've been so strong. Come rest." "It's not real," I whispered to myself, clutching the small pocket knife I'd taken from the library's emergency kit. The cold steel was my only tether to reality. None of this is real. But the fog seemed to hear me. The whispers grew sharper, angrier. "You can't deny us," they hissed. "We're part of you." I stumbled, falling to my knees. The ground was soft, almost spongy, and when I looked down, I saw that it wasn't dirt or grass beneath me. It was something else, a pulsing, living mass that recoiled at my touch. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me. That was when I saw them. Figures emerged from the fog, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, as if puppets on invisible strings. Their eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow light that pierced through the gloom. One of them reached out to me, its fingers elongated and claw-like. "Join us," it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing in my mind. "We've been waiting for you." I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the ground as the fog seemed to thicken around me. The whispers became a roar, a deafening cacophony that drowned out my own thoughts. I didn't know where I was going. The town had dissolved into an endless expanse of white and gray. Every landmark was gone, swallowed by the mist. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. The fog was thinner here, the ground firm and solid beneath my feet. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. Hanging from its limbs were objects, photographs, trinkets, clothing, all suspended by thin strands of fog that seemed to hold them aloft. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the items. A photograph caught my attention, its edges worn and faded. It was of my mother, smiling brightly with her arms around me as a child. Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to touch it, but the moment my fingers brushed the surface, the whispers stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. The fog around me stilled, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive weight. I turned to run, but the figures from before were there, surrounding the clearing. They moved closer, their glowing eyes fixed on me. "It's time," one of them said, its voice resonating like a deep drumbeat in my chest. "You cannot escape." Desperation clawed at me as I fumbled with the pocket knife. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice sounded weak and hollow in the vast emptiness. The figures didn't stop. They moved in unison, their limbs bending in impossible angles as they closed the distance. In a last-ditch effort, I slashed at the nearest figure. The blade passed through it as though it were smoke, and yet it recoiled, a high-pitched wail escaping its form. The others hesitated, their glowing eyes narrowing. Realizing this might be my only chance, I lunged toward the tree. If the items hanging from its branches were connected to the fog, perhaps destroying them would break its hold. I grabbed the photograph of my mother and tore it from the strand of mist holding it. The ground beneath me trembled, and the figures let out a collective scream. The fog began to swirl violently, the whispers returning in a chaotic storm of sound. I ripped down more items, a child's stuffed animal, a wedding ring, a pair of glasses, each one sending shockwaves through the clearing. The figures faltered, their forms flickering like dying flames. But the fog wasn't done with me. A tendril of mist shot out from the tree, wrapping around my wrist and pulling me toward the trunk. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and ancient. "You cannot destroy us," it said. "We are eternal." Summoning every ounce of strength, I plunged the pocket knife into the tree's bark. The effect was immediate. The fog recoiled, its tendrils writhing as if in pain. The figures dissolved into nothingness, their screams fading into the distance. The ground beneath me buckled, and I was thrown backward as a blinding light erupted from the tree. When I opened my eyes, the fog was gone. The town lay in ruins, its buildings crumbled and overgrown with weeds. The streets were cracked and empty, as though years had passed in the span of days. I was alone. I wandered through the desolate town, calling out for anyone who might have survived. But there was no answer, only the faint echo of my own voice. The whispers were gone, but their absence felt like a gaping wound. Eventually, I made my way back to the library. The doors hung off their hinges, and the shelves were bare, the books reduced to ash. In the center of the room, I found a single object, the photograph of my mother, untouched and pristine. I picked it up, tears streaming down my face. The fog had taken everything, but it hadn't taken this. As I held the photo close, I heard a faint sound, not a whisper, but a breeze, gentle and soothing. For the first time in days, I felt hope. But deep down, I knew the fog wasn't truly gone. It was merely waiting, biding its time. And when it returned, I would be ready. Or so I told myself. Even as the days passed, the scars left by the fog lingered. The silence of the abandoned town gnawed at me, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I scavenged what I could, surviving on canned goods from the desolate grocery store and collecting rainwater in cracked barrels. I became a ghost in my own home, flinching at every creak and groan of the empty buildings. Sometimes at night, I would hear faint echoes, faint enough to make me question if they were real or just my mind playing tricks. They were not the oppressive whispers from before, but distant and haunting, like the remnants of a melody forgotten by time. I told myself it was nothing, that the fog was truly gone, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Weeks turned into months, and I began to explore beyond the ruins of the town. The roads leading out were overgrown, and the forests that surrounded us seemed darker, more twisted. The world felt wrong, as if the fog had left its mark on everything it touched. The air was heavy, the sky perpetually gray, and the sun seemed unable to shine with its former brilliance. One day, while wandering the outskirts of town, I came across a strange sight. The circle of trees stood untouched by the decay that plagued the rest of the area. Their bark was smooth and pale, and their leaves shimmered with an unnatural silver hue. In the center of the circle was a pool of water, perfectly still and mirror-like. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, I approached the pool. As I peered into its depths, I saw not my reflection, but scenes from the past. The town as it once was, bustling with life and laughter. My mother baking cookies in our old kitchen. Joe Harper laughing with his wife at the gas station. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, a glimpse of everything we had lost. But then the images changed. The vibrant town dissolved into shadows, and the faces of my loved ones twisted into grotesque visages. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. "You thought you could escape," they said. "You are ours." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The pool began to ripple, and tendrils of mist rose from its surface. I turned and ran, the forest closing in around me. The whispers followed, growing louder with each step. I didn't stop until I was back in the ruins of the library, gasping for breath. That night, I dreamt of the tree in the clearing. Its branches reached out to me, beckoning. The whispers were there too, but softer, almost soothing. "Come back," they urged. "Finish what you started." When I awoke, the photograph of my mother was missing. In its place was a single leaf, silver and shimmering, like those from the trees by the pool. The fog may have retreated, but it was not defeated. It was waiting, watching, and it would return. I knew then that my battle with the fog was far from over. It had taken everything from me, but it had also awakened something within me, a resolve, a defiance. The fog was ancient and powerful, but so was the will to survive. As I prepared for the inevitable return of the whispers, I vowed to uncover the truth behind the fog. Why had it come? What did it want? And most importantly, how could it be stopped? The answers lay somewhere in the ruins of the town, in the forest, in the twisted remnants of the life I once knew. The fog may have been eternal, but so was hope. And as long as I drew breath, I would fight. Or so I told myself. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog was still watching me. It was subtle, like a shadow at the edge of my vision or a fleeting chill on a warm day. The photograph of my mother remained missing, but I found more silver leaves scattered around the library, as if marking a trail only I could follow. The pool in the forest haunted my dreams. Each night, I saw its still surface ripple as faces emerged, faces of the lost, their eyes pleading for help. Among them, my mother's face lingered the longest. "Find us," she whispered, her voice carrying the same mixture of love and desperation that had lured me into the fog before. I had no choice but to return to the pool. The trek through the forest was harrowing. The twisted trees seemed to lean closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. The ground was soft and spongy, pulsing faintly as if alive. I clutched the pocket knife tightly, though I knew it would offer little protection against whatever awaited me. When I reached the circle of silver trees, the air grew colder. The pool's surface was as still and reflective as I remembered, but now it was surrounded by faint, glowing symbols etched into the ground. They pulsed with a dim light, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. I crouched to examine the symbols, tracing their strange patterns with my fingers. They felt warm to the touch, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Suddenly, the pool began to ripple, and the whispers returned, not as a cacophony, but as a single voice, deep and resonant. "You seek answers," it said, "but answers come at a price." The water shimmered, and an image appeared, the town as it was before the fog, vibrant and alive. Then the image shifted, showing the fog creeping in, engulfing everything in its path. Figures emerged, shadowy, indistinct, but undeniably human. They seemed to guide the fog, their glowing eyes watching as it consumed the town. "Who are they?" I asked aloud, my voice trembling. "Why did this happen?" The pool's surface rippled again, and the voice replied, "They are the keepers, guardians of the boundary between worlds. Your town broke the balance, and the fog was their judgment." "What balance? What did we do?" My frustration boiled over, but the voice offered no clear answers. Instead, the water stilled, reflecting my own face back at me. "Seek the tree," it said finally. "The answers lie within its roots." The tree in the clearing loomed larger than I remembered, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like a monument to despair. The ground around it was cracked and scorched, as though the earth itself had rejected its presence. Yet the photograph of my mother hung from its lowest branch, pristine and untouched. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding. The whispers returned, louder with each step, urging me forward and warning me to turn back all at once. When I reached the tree, I hesitated. The bark felt cold and slick under my fingers, and the moment I touched it, the whispers coalesced into a deafening roar. The ground beneath me gave way, and I fell into darkness. I landed in a cavern, its walls pulsating with the same eerie light as the symbols by the pool. Roots from the tree above hung down like twisted veins, and at the center of the cavern was a massive stone altar. On it lay objects from the town, wedding rings, children's toys, even a pair of work boots I recognized as Joe Harper's. The voice from the pool echoed through the cavern. "These are the tokens of those claimed by the fog. Their memories feed the boundary, maintaining the balance." I approached the altar, my eyes scanning the items. Each one seemed to pulse with a faint light, as though alive. Among them was the photograph of my mother. As I reached for it, the voice spoke again. "Choose wisely. To take from the altar is to alter the balance. What you restore may come at a cost." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the photograph. The weight of the voice's warning pressed heavily on me, but I couldn't leave without her. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The moment I touched the photograph, the cavern trembled. The roots above writhed violently, and the altar's light dimmed. The voice grew angrier, its tone reverberating through the cavern. "You have disrupted the balance. The fog will not forgive." I clawed my way back to the surface, the photograph clutched tightly in my hand. The tree was withering before my eyes, its bark cracking and its branches collapsing inward. The fog returned, rolling in with a vengeance, thicker and darker than before. The whispers were no longer coaxing, they were enraged. "You dare defy us," they roared. "You will pay." I ran back to the library, the fog nipping at my heels. The ruins offered little protection, but it was all I had. I barricaded myself in what remained of the main hall, lighting the last of the candles. The photograph seemed to glow faintly, and as I stared at it, I felt a strange warmth emanating from it, a spark of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. The fog pressed against the windows, seeping through cracks in the walls. The whispers surrounded me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. But I refused to give in. I held the photograph aloft, shouting into the void. "You took everything from me, but you won't take this. You won't take her." The photograph's glow intensified, and the fog recoiled, its tendrils writhing as if in pain. The whispers faltered, their voices disjointed and chaotic. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped outside, holding the photograph like a talisman. The fog swirled around me, a living storm of anger and despair. But the photograph's light grew brighter, piercing through the darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and the fog began to dissipate, unraveling like a frayed thread. As the last remnants of the fog vanished, the town was revealed, its ruins bathed in the soft light of dawn. The air was clear, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe freely. But I knew this was only the beginning. The fog would return, and when it did, I would be ready. Armed with the knowledge of the tree and the altar, I would uncover the secrets of the keepers and find a way to end their hold on this world. For now, though, I stood in the ruins of my home, the photograph of my mother in my hands, and allowed myself a moment of peace. I hadn't planned to stop, but exhaustion doesn't care about plans. After driving through miles of rain-slicked highway, the Pinewood Inn was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in hours. Its flickering neon sign cut through the mist like a warning, but I was too tired to heed it. I pulled into the gravel lot, my tires crunching to a stop. There were only 3 cars parked there, their windows fogged with condensation. The building itself looked weathered by decades of neglect, its once bright paint faded to a sickly gray. I hesitated for a moment, the low hum of dread settling in my stomach. Then the rain picked up, heavier now, drumming against the roof of my car. I grabbed my bag and made my way inside. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew, with water stains creeping across the ceiling. A small desk sat against the far wall, and behind it was a man who looked as though he hadn't slept in weeks. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, and he greeted me with a kind of smile that wasn't meant to be reassuring. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes," I said. "Just for the night." He slid a guest book toward me, its pages curling with age. I signed my name, the pen scratching faintly against the paper. "Room 7, he said, handing me a brass key. "Thanks," I said, turning toward the hallway. "Wait," he said abruptly. I paused, looking back at him. His expression was unreadable. "Don't turn on the TV," he said. "What?" He didn't elaborate, just stared at me with those sunken eyes. "Okay," I said, my voice uncertain. "Thanks for the warning, I guess." Room 7 was exactly what you'd expect from a place like this. The bedspread was a floral pattern straight out of the 1970s, the wallpaper yellowed and peeling at the edges. A single chair sat near the window, and in the corner of the room was an old CRT television, its screen blank and reflective. I tossed my bag onto the chair and sank onto the bed, the springs groaning beneath me. The receptionist's warning replayed in my mind. "Don't turn on the TV." I glanced at it. The black screen seemed to absorb the dim light, casting an unnatural darkness over the corner of the room. "It's just a TV," I told myself. But the longer I stared at it, the heavier the air in the room seemed to become. I shook off the feeling and turned away, climbing under the scratchy covers. The rain outside continued to fall, its rhythmic tapping against the window lulling me into an uneasy sleep. I woke to the sound of static. It was faint at first, barely audible beneath the drumming of rain. But as I sat up, the noise grew louder, filling the room with its crackling presence. The TV was on. I froze, staring at the screen. Gray and white snow filled the display, the static hissing like whispers in the dark. I turned it off, I muttered, my voice trembling. As I reached for the remote, the static shifted. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something, a figure, faint and indistinct, standing in the center of the screen. The image flickered, then disappeared. I turned the TV off and climbed back into bed, pulling the covers over my head. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, the static was gone, but unease lingered like a bad dream. I packed my things quickly, eager to leave, but when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. The hallway wasn't the same. The carpet was gone, replaced by wooden floorboards that creaked beneath my weight. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air smelled damp and sour. "What the hell?" I whispered. I turned back toward my room, but the door had disappeared. In its place was a blank wall. Panic set in. I stumbled down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The further I went, the more the hallway twisted and turned, becoming a labyrinth of identical corridors. Doors lined the walls, each one marked with a brass number. I tried several, but they were all locked. The static returned, faint at first, then louder. Ahead of me, at the end of the hallway, the door creaked open. Room 7. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The room was identical to the one I'd left. Same bedspread, same wallpaper, same ominous television. But something was different. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the room itself was alive. The TV clicked on. This time, the screen didn't show static. It showed the hallway outside the room. A figure stood at the far end, its blurred face turned toward the camera. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure began to walk, its movement slow and deliberate. The screen flickered, and suddenly, the figure was in the room with me. I stumbled back, my legs trembling beneath me. The figure stood motionless in the corner, its face an unrecognizable blur. It wore a dark suit, its fabric hanging loosely on its thin frame. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head, as if studying me. Then it spoke, its voice a distorted crackle. "You shouldn't have turned it on." Before I could respond, the lights flickered, and the room went dark. When the lights returned, the figure was gone, but the static remained. The TV now showed images, faint, flickering scenes of people. I saw a man sitting in a dark room, staring blankly at a television. A woman crying, her face buried in her hands. A child, standing motionless, their eyes wide with fear. The scenes shifted, blending into one another like a broken reel of film. "What is this?" I asked aloud, though I wasn't expecting an answer. "The signal," a voice replied. I turned to see the figure standing by the door, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's everywhere," the figure said, "but only some can see it." Over the next few days, or what felt like days, I learned the truth about the Pinewood Inn. The figure, who called itself the Signal, explained that the inn wasn't bound by the normal rules of time and space. It was a node, a point of connection for those who had stumbled too close to the frequency. "What happens to them?" I asked. "They become part of the broadcast," the Signal replied. I thought about the people I'd seen on the TV, the man, the woman, the child. Were they trapped here too? "Can I leave?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Signal didn't reply. Desperation drove me to try. I ran through the hallways, throwing open doors, searching for an exit. But every path led back to room 7. The TV was always on, its screen showing my every move in real time. At one point, I saw something else, a car pulling into the parking lot. A man stepped out, looking tired and disheveled. It was me. I don't know how long I've been here. The Signal doesn't speak to me anymore. The hallways are silent, the room's empty. But the TV is never off. It shows people sometimes, new arrivals, wandering the halls, their faces filled with the same fear I felt. I try to warn them to scream through the static, but they can't hear me. All I can do is watch and wait. When I was a child, I loved libraries. There was something magical about walking into a room lined with books, each one a doorway to another world. I would spend hours in the local library after school, tucked into a corner with whatever book had caught my interest that week. But the library I'm about to tell you about wasn't magical. It was something else entirely. It was my sophomore year of college when I first found it. I'd been pulling an all-nighter, finishing a term paper on medieval folklore. Around 3 a.m., I realized I'd made a mistake in my citations and needed a specific book to fix it, one that wasn't available online. The university library was closed, of course. But as I paced the halls of my dorm, trying to think of a solution, I saw something strange through the window, a faint glow coming from the far end of campus, near the old administration building. Curious, I grabbed my coat and headed outside. The glow grew brighter as I approached, illuminating a small building that hadn't been there before. It was a squat, rectangular structure made of weathered stone, with narrow, arched windows and a single wooden door. Above the door was a rusted sign that read, Asterisk, the Library of Silence. Asterisk. I should have turned around then and there. But I was desperate for that book, and the warm glow spilling from the windows felt inviting. The inside of the library was quiet, unnaturally so. No footsteps, no rustle of paper, not even the hum of electricity. It was as though the air itself refused to carry sound. The room was larger than it looked from the outside, with towering shelves that stretched so high I couldn't see the ceiling. The books were old, bound in leather and smelling of mildew. There were no computers, no signs of modern technology, just rows upon rows of ancient tomes. Behind a small desk near the entrance sat the librarian. She was tall and thin, her skin pale to the point of translucence. Her eyes were sunken, and her lips were sewn shut with thin black thread. Despite this, she nodded politely as I entered, gesturing for me to take a seat. I cleared my throat. I'm looking for a book. Folklore and the Supernatural by Edward Harker. The librarian tilted her head, then stood. She moved with an eerie grace, gliding silently down the aisles. Minutes later, she returned, holding the exact book I needed. Thanks, I said, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. She didn't react, just nodded again and returned to her desk. I sat at a nearby table and flipped open the book. It was exactly what I needed. The text, the citations, it all matched perfectly. Relieved, I copied the information and prepared to leave. But as I stood, something caught my eye. There was a faint impression on the table, like someone had written something with heavy pressure. I leaned closer and traced the words with my finger. Asterisk, don't take the books. Asterisk. I glanced at the librarian. She was staring at me now, her hollow eyes unblinking. My pulse quickened. Maybe it was the late hour or my frayed nerves, but I decided I didn't want to stay there any longer. I slid the book into my bag, rationalizing that I'd bring it back the next day. As I stepped toward the door, I heard a faint noise behind me, soft, like the creak of leather. The librarian was standing now, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and though her lips remained sewn shut, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper. Put it back. I froze. I'll return it tomorrow, I stammered. I just need it for tonight. The whisper came again, louder this time. Asterisk, put it back, asterisk. Ignoring the chill that ran down my spine, I turned and bolted out the door. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the librarian's hollow stare and heard the whisper echoing in my mind. By morning, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I finished my paper and resolved to return the book as soon as the sun came up. But when I returned to the spot where the library had been, it was gone. I searched the entire campus, even asked the maintenance staff if they'd seen anything unusual. No one had any idea what I was talking about. For the next few days, strange things began to happen. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. Books in my dorm shifted positions when I wasn't looking. And at night, I heard whispers, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing day. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to destroy the book. I threw it into the fireplace in the common room, watching as the flames consumed the old leather binding. But as the last page turned to ash, the whispers stopped. And then the silence came. It wasn't just quiet. It was total absence of sound, my footsteps, my breathing, even my heartbeat. I couldn't hear any of it. The world had become a vacuum, and I was trapped in it. That night, she came for me. I woke to find the librarian standing at the foot of my bed. Her mouth was no longer sewn shut, but wide open, revealing a void of writhing shadows. Her hands stretched impossibly long, reaching for me. Before I could scream, she spoke, her voice a thunderous echo in the silence. You cannot destroy what belongs to me. Her fingers closed around my throat, and everything went black. When I woke, I was back in the library of silence. But this time, I wasn't a visitor. I was part of it. Now I sit behind a desk, silent and hollow, just like the librarian before me. My mouth is sewn shut, my voice stolen by the library. I watch as new visitors wander in, always drawn by their own desperation. I want to warn them, to scream at them to leave, but I can't. The only thing I can do is watch as they repeat my mistake, taking a book and sealing their fate. If you ever see a strange library glowing in the night, stay away. No book is worth the price. And if you do go inside, whatever you do, don't take the books. In the library of silence, the books are not ordinary. Each one carries a piece of a soul, a fragment of someone who once existed. These souls aren't just stored, they're trapped, their essence bound to the pages for eternity. Some of the books are mundane, containing simple stories or forgotten knowledge. Others are far more sinister. They hold secrets no one was meant to know, dark truths that twist the minds of those who read them. Whispers in the silence suggest that the books are created from the visitors themselves, their lives, their memories, their fears, woven into the ink and bound to the leather. After I became the librarian, I learned that every visitor who takes a book is marked. The book they steal becomes a tether, dragging them back to the library, where they're consumed and turned into a new tome. This is the library's cycle: feeding, growing, and preserving the silence. The worst part? I've seen the titles of some of these books. They bear the names of their authors, the victims who came before me. I'm not the only one cursed to serve this place. There are others, scattered throughout the infinite aisles. They've been here for years, decades, maybe even centuries. Some retain fragments of their humanity, wandering the shelves aimlessly, clutching at the tatters of their former selves. Others have become part of the library itself, faceless shadows that drift silently, merging with the darkness. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them in the periphery of my vision. They never approach, but their presence is suffocating, a constant reminder of what I'm becoming. I wonder if they were once like me, desperate to escape, clinging to the hope of breaking the library's curse. Now they are nothing but echoes. One figure stands apart from the others, the Guardian. I don't know what it is, but it rules the library. It moves between the shelves like a phantom, its shape constantly shifting, its presence cold and oppressive. Unlike the other figures, the Guardian isn't silent. When it speaks, its voice is a symphony of screams and whispers, overlapping and indecipherable. I've heard it only once when I first tried to escape. "You belong here now," it said. The silence claims all. The Guardian is the one who enforces the rules, who ensures that the library remains hidden from the world until it is ready to feed again. It watches everything, waiting for the next visitor to make a mistake. I've spent countless days, or has it been years, trapped in this place, cataloging the endless shelves, guiding new visitors to their doom. But recently, I discovered something. Deep in the oldest section of the library, where the air is thick with decay and the shelves lean like broken teeth, I found a book unlike any other. It had no title, no markings, just a plain black cover. When I opened it, there were no words on the pages, only a mirror-like surface that reflected my face. And then I heard my own voice. "You can still escape," it whispered. "But you must find the first book." The first book. I've heard whispers about it from the other shadows, fragments of stories about a tome that predates the library itself. They say it contains the key to breaking the cycle, to destroying the library and freeing its captives. But no one knows where it is or if it even exists. The Guardian must know. It guards the oldest sections of the library jealously, its presence growing stronger the closer I get. But I have nothing left to lose. If I can find the first book, maybe I can undo what's been done to me and to the others. I've come to understand that the Library of Silence isn't stationary. It moves, appearing wherever desperation calls to it. A lost traveler, a sleepless student, a grieving parent, anyone seeking answers or solace is a potential victim. Each time the library relocates, it leaves behind traces, a lingering silence, a missing person, an unexplained glow in the night. But it always returns to its foundation, the place where it was first built. The whispers in the books suggest this place is ancient, older than memory. Some say it was created by a group of scholars who sought forbidden knowledge, their greed for secrets leading to their doom. Others claim it's a sentient entity, a predator that lures in the curious and devours them. Whatever the truth, the library is growing. Its shelves stretch further than they did when I first arrived, and the number of visitors is increasing. I fear that one day, it will no longer need to wait for people to come to it. It will go to them. If you're reading this, it means the Library of Silence is already close. You might think you're safe, that this is just a story. But if you ever see a strange building glowing in the night, or hear whispers in the silence, remember my words. Do not go inside. And if you do, don't speak to the librarian. Don't open the books. And for the love of all that's left, don't take anything with you. The silence is always listening. The whispers among the books speak of an ancient pact, a deal struck in blood and silence. Centuries ago, a group of scholars known as the Seekers of the Void gathered in a forgotten corner of the world. They sought the ultimate truth, a knowledge that transcended life and death, time and space. They believed that within the silence of the universe lay the answers to everything. Using forbidden rituals, they created the Library of Silence as a repository for all knowledge. But they underestimated the cost. The silence they summoned was not a void of peace, but a living entity, a thing that fed on sound, on stories, on lives. It turned on its creators, consuming their voices and binding their souls to the books they had so carefully crafted. The first book was the key, the seed of the library. It held the ritual that created the silence, but it also contained the means to destroy it. The silence knew this and hid the book deep within its endless halls, ensuring that no one could use it against it. Over the centuries, the library grew, feeding on the desperate and the curious, each victim adding another shelf to its ever-expanding collection. The Seekers of the Void became the first librarians, their bodies twisted into guardians of the silence. The Guardian itself is said to be the leader of the Seekers, now a shapeless entity bound to protect the silence for eternity. I've made progress. I've mapped parts of the library, noting the strange ways the shelves shift and rearrange themselves. The deeper I go, the more the air seems to pulse with an oppressive energy. The books here are different, heavier, darker, their bindings made of materials I don't want to identify. The whispers in the black book guide me, though I don't know if I can trust them. Sometimes, they warn me of the Guardian's approach, its shadow stretching impossibly long between the shelves. Other times, they lead me to dead ends or rooms that shouldn't exist. The first book is near. I can feel it. But the closer I get, the more the library resists. The aisles stretch endlessly, looping back on themselves. The silence grows heavier, pressing against my ears like a physical force. And the Guardian, it's watching. Always watching. After what felt like weeks or maybe years, I found something new, a door hidden behind a collapsing shelf. It was old, carved with symbols that seemed to writhe when I looked at them too long. The whispers in the black book urged me forward, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The door opened into a vast chamber unlike anything I'd seen before. The walls were lined with shelves, but instead of books, they held objects, artifacts from across time and space. A cracked pocket watch, an ancient dagger, a child's toy. Each object radiated a strange energy, as though it held a fragment of a life stolen by the library. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested the first book. It was unassuming, small, bound in simple black leather. But the air around it hummed with power, and as I approached, the whispers in my head turned into a deafening roar. Take it. The moment my hand touched the first book, the silence shattered. A deafening howl erupted from the shadows, and the Guardian appeared, its form shifting and contorting, a mass of writhing limbs and hollow faces. You cannot take it, it roared, its voice a cacophony of screams. The silence must endure. I ran, clutching the book to my chest. The library twisted around me, the aisles collapsing and reforming as the Guardian pursued me. The shelves seemed alive, their edges sharp and grasping, tearing at my clothes as I passed. The whispers turned into screams, the voices of the souls trapped in the books begging me to save them or to let them die. I don't know how long I ran. Time has no meaning in the library. But eventually, I found the entrance again, the wooden door standing ajar, the faint glow of the outside world spilling through. The Guardian was close, its shadow stretching across the walls. I turned, clutching the first book, and spoke the words the whispers had taught me. The first book wasn't just a key, it was a weapon. Its pages contained a counter-ritual, a way to sever the library's connection to the silence. But performing it came at a cost. As I spoke the words, the library began to shake, the shelves collapsing into themselves, the books burning in silent flames. The Guardian screamed, its form unraveling as the silence was torn apart. The voices of the trapped souls grew louder, a deafening chorus of relief and anguish. I felt their pain, their gratitude, their anger. And I felt the library fighting back, its essence clawing at me, trying to pull me into its depths. The final words of the ritual burned my throat, but I forced them out. With a blinding flash of light, the library collapsed. I woke on the edge of campus, the first book still in my hands. The Library of Silence was gone, reduced to a pile of ash and rubble. But I knew it wasn't truly destroyed. The silence can't be killed, only contained. The first book is the only thing keeping it from returning. I've hidden it, buried it in a place no one will find. But I know the library will try to come back. It always does. If you ever see a strange building glowing in the night, turn away. Don't let curiosity pull you in. Don't let the silence claim you. And if you ever find a book with no title, bound in black leather, burn it. Some knowledge is too dangerous to keep. For years, I thought I was safe. The Library of Silence was gone, and I had hidden the first book in a remote location, far from prying eyes. Life returned to some semblance of normalcy. I graduated, got a job, and tried to forget what had happened. But some things can't be forgotten. The dream started a few months ago. Visions of towering shelves and shadowed corridors, of whispers rising in a deafening crescendo. I would wake drenched in sweat, the echoes of the Guardian's screams still ringing in my ears. At first, I dismissed them as nightmares, remnants of trauma buried deep in my subconscious. But then I saw the glow. It was faint at first, barely noticeable through the haze of city lights. But each night, it grew brighter. And with it came the whispers, soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The Library of Silence was returning. I knew I couldn't ignore it. The first book was the key, the anchor that kept the silence contained. If the library was coming back, it meant someone had found it. I retraced my steps to the place where I had buried the book, a desolate stretch of forest miles from civilization. But when I arrived, the earth was disturbed. The book was gone. Panic set in. I searched the area frantically, but it was as though the book had vanished into thin air. As I stood there, the whispers grew louder, circling me like a swarm of invisible insects. "You cannot escape us." I turned, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her lips sewn shut. The librarian. Then she was gone. A few days later, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Asterisk, do you believe in second chances?" Asterisk attached with a single image, a photograph of the first book, sitting on a dusty table surrounded by flickering candles. The message was clear. Someone had found the book and was trying to harness its power. The whispers hinted at who it might be, a seeker, someone drawn to the library's promise of forbidden knowledge. They believed the book would grant them power, immortality, or answers to life's deepest questions. They had no idea what they were unleashing. Desperate to stop the library from returning, I began tracking the seeker. It wasn't easy. They moved constantly, always staying just out of reach. But with every step I took, the glow grew brighter, the whispers louder. The library was drawing them in, guiding them to complete the ritual that would bring it back. I finally caught up with them in an abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax, and the walls were covered in strange symbols drawn in ash. The seeker stood in the center of the room, clutching the first book. "You don't understand what you're doing," I said, my voice shaking. "That book isn't a gift. It's a curse." They turned to me, their eyes wild and bloodshot. "You don't know what it's like," they said, "to want answers so badly you do anything." "The library will give me what I need." "No," I said. "It will take everything from you." But they didn't listen. Before I could stop them, they began to read from the book, their voice echoing unnaturally in the empty space. The ground trembled, and the air grew cold. Shadows coalesced around them, forming the familiar shape of the Guardian. "You should not have come back," it roared, its voice shaking the walls. The silence claims all. I barely escaped the church as it collapsed into itself, consumed by the library's return. When I looked back, the building was gone, replaced by the familiar stone structure of the Library of Silence. The glow spilled from its windows, brighter than before, and the whispers were deafening. The seeker was gone, their soul likely consumed, their essence bound to a new book on the library's shelves. The Guardian had returned as well, stronger than ever, its form even more grotesque and shifting. And now the library wasn't hiding anymore. It had returned with purpose. The Library of Silence is no longer a place of shadows and secrets. It's growing bolder, appearing in crowded cities, on quiet country roads, in the hearts of bustling universities. It doesn't wait for people to come to it. It reaches out, calling to them, drawing them in with promises of knowledge and power. The first book is back on its pedestal, the key to the silence's power. And the whispers tell me that it's not just one library anymore. There are others now, fragments of the original, spreading like a virus. I've tried to warn people, but no one believes me. They think it's just a story, a campfire tale to scare the gullible. But every day, more people disappear, drawn to the library's glow. I don't know if I can stop it, but I have to try. The first book is the key, and I know where it is. If I can reach it, maybe I can destroy it for good this time. But the Guardian will be waiting, and the library's power is stronger than ever. If you're reading this, it means I haven't returned. It means the library has won. But there's still hope. The first book is the key. If you find it, destroy it. Burn it, bury it, cast it into the deepest ocean. Do whatever it takes to keep it out of the library's grasp. And remember, the silence is always listening.